verse to me that kind of helps in some ways explain the situation. In other ways it complicates it a little bit. In 1 Chronicles chapter 6, David is appointing musicians. And in verse 33, and these are the ones who ministered with their sons. Of the sons of the Kohathites were Herman the singer, the son of Joel, the son of Samuel, the son of Elkanah. So apparently Samuel was a Levite. Kohath was the second son of Levi. So if he truly is, and he is, a Levite, then how do we explain what happens in 1 Samuel chapter 1? Now there was a certain man of the mountains of Ephraim. His name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, son of an Ephraimite. Okay. How can Samuel be both an Ephraimite and a Levite? The simplest explanation, and the one that I think answers the most problems with that, is that, remember, the Levites do not have land. They're not assigned land. They have cities in various territories. So he could live in Ephraim and be called an Ephraimite because that's where he lived, not genealogy. By genealogy, he's a Levite. By where he's living, he's an Ephraimite. Now, that's the best that I can do with that. If anyone else has a suggestion or idea, I'd be happy to hear it. But that explains both situations. Okay? We left off, we were talking about the naming of kings, and the people wanting kings. So if you would, we'll start our review of Samuel in chapter 8. Verse 4, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel and said, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Samuel's sons, like many others that we read about, are not faithful, and he doesn't have control over them. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. And we talked about that a little bit. Saul is the one that is recognized by God to be that king. He was a Benjamite, and we talked last week about the fact that not too long before all of this, the Benjamites were almost totally annihilated by their own tribesmen, their own people. They were down to 600 men, so it's a very small tribe. But Saul is the one that's chosen. He had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. He had the appearance of a king, of a man in control. Skip down to chapter 10. Samuel is anointing Saul as king. And in verse 6, he says, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with him and be turned into another man. And let it be when these signs come to you that you do as the occasion demands, for God is with you. You shall go down before me to Gilgal, and surely I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices of peace offerings. Now, this next sentence is going to be absolutely critical to Saul's future as king. 7 days you shall wait till I come to you and show you what you should do. We're going to see that he doesn't do that. When when the people are gathered together and Saul is being anointed, there's kind of a strange event that happens. 1 Samuel 10, chapter 10, verse 20. And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was chosen. And Saul, the son of Kish, was chosen. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, has the man come here yet? The Lord answered, there he is, hidden among the equipment. Saul wasn't really ready for this task at this point. He was hidden among the equipment. Let's skip on over to chapter 13. This is where the occasion occurs that Saul does not wait those 7 days that we talked about earlier. He was to wait 7 days for Samuel to come in. Pick up the reading in the last half of verse 7, chapter 13. And as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Then he waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So Saul said, bring a burnt offering and peace offering here to me. And he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him that he might greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? Saul said, when I saw the people were scattered from me, you did not come within the days appointed. Reason number one, the people were scattered, and that the Philistines gathered together. Samuel hadn't arrived, and he could see the army of the Philistines gathering together. And I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering, an offering that was not authorized. You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. That is the first of 3 events that I want to look at this morning. Saul is one of those characters that just kind of seems to keep tripping over his own feet. He just can't keep it all together and do the right thing. There's a number of events that he falls short in, but there's 3 specifically that he is condemned for. That's the first one. Second one is in chapter 15. Saul is going to spare a king of the Amalekites. Verse 3, now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox, sheep, camel, and donkey. He is to totally eradicate the Amalekites. In verse 7, Saul attacked the Amalekites, and he took the king captive. In verse 9, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good. He absolutely did not do what he had been told to do. Now verse 10, now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he has set up a monument for himself. So he was gone on around, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Saul and said, Blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? Saul's reply was, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people, not me, the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. They did part of it. Kind of like we talked a couple of weeks ago about the people when they came into the land. They did part of it. They attacked and provided a place for themselves to live, but they didn't utterly destroy the people. Then Samuel said to Saul, Be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord has said to me last night. When you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king? Now the Lord has sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. And in verse 20, Saul said to Samuel, But I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on the mission on which the Lord has sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites, but the people took of the plunder sheep and oxen and best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed to sacrifice to the Lord your God. We talked about excuses. Excuses don't matter. Here's a phrase that we're going to see, or a passage that we're going to see several times. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? They made up their own rules, so to speak. We can make up our own rules. But we have the voice through the Bible, the same as they had the voice through the prophets. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of the rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, He also has rejected you from being king. That's the second event. The third one is in chapter 28. This one is fascinating in a lot of different ways. Samuel has died. Saul has told no more spirits and mediums. So he is not getting the answers that I'll just read that. The Philistines are camped again. They're ready to attack. And in verse 6, and when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, by Urim, or by the prophets. He's not getting an answer from any of the normal mediums that he could use. So then he asked for a woman who is a medium. They go to her and inquire of her. His servants found him a medium that we call the Witch of Endor. So Saul put on a disguise because he had outlawed this. And he goes to the woman, and she's a little bit suspicious, but in verse 11, the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" Saul wants to communicate with Samuel. So he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." And when the woman saw Samuel, this is verse 12, she cried out with a loud voice and said, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." And Saul reassures her that nothing will happen. And he perceived that it was Samuel. And in verse 15, he said, Samuel said, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answers that he's distressed. He sees the enemy gathering, and he can't get answers anywhere. Verse 16, then Samuel said, "So why do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy?" You should recognize, you should know what's going on, because God has departed from you. And the Lord has done for himself as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord nor execute his fierce wrath upon you. Amalek, therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Can you imagine what kind of a night Saul spent hearing this prophecy that not only he was going to die, but his sons with him the next day? And we do see certainly that kingdom is torn from him. Again, there's a lot of things that Saul has done, and we're going to go back and kind of come through some of those. But these are the three cornerstones of Saul's failures, if you will. They're listed here, and Saul gets immediate response from God through Samuel. And this is also, we're getting to the point where a lot of this is recorded in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And there, these three things are listed as the primary reasons that Saul fails as king. Okay, let's go back now and look at some more of the details. Find the starting place here. I've mentioned several times about ironworking, and I'd like to read 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 19. This is one of the reasons, or this is probably the primary reason physically, that the Philistines have such a dominant position over Israel during the time of the judges, through the early part of the Kings. Verse 19. Now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. They were keeping this metalworking secret to themselves, not allowing the Israelites to have it. But all the Israelites would go down to the Philistines to sharpen each man's plowshare, his mattock, his axe, and his sickle. And the charge for a sharpening was a pim for a plowshare, the mattocks, forks, and axes, and to set the points of the goads. Now, that would be a tremendous advantage, military advantage, if you have metalworking and your enemies, your opponents, have skins of animals as shields. Just a tremendous advantage. Okay. Saul has a son named Jonathan, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with the story, the relationship that David and Jonathan have. We're going to go now through a series of events where Saul is very angry at David and tries to kill him any number of times. David will go actually into flight. He will go to various places in Israel. But he always has Jonathan, and we'll see later on that David marries one of Saul's daughters, and at least early in their marriage, then she is a supporter of David. So the two of them can help protect David when Saul is really angry. Let's go to chapter 16. Chapter 16 is where Samuel is going to anoint David as king. And this is going to be pretty much a private ceremony. There's not going to be many people involved, so that Saul is not going to learn of this for a while. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons." Samuel is fearful of going. If Saul hears it, he will kill me. Samuel has delivered some pretty unpopular messages to Saul. But the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord." He provides an excuse for David. Verse 4, so Samuel did what the Lord said and went to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming. The reputation of Saul has gone out. The people know and fully understand that Samuel, at this point, is known as not a popular person with Saul. Talks about in verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or the physical stature." He's going through the sons and trying to decide which one. And God tells him, don't look at the physical. For the Lord does not see as a man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And in verse 12, we see the physical description of David. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." We see David being anointed as king here. And immediately we see in verse 14, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. You know, it's easy to read into that the Spirit leaves Saul at the same time that it goes into David. But what we're going to read is that it's more of a bad mood specifically. It doesn't prohibit the fact that the Spirit does leave Saul. He's going to govern now without the guidance of God. So he is in a mental state that he has trouble sleeping. So he brings in David to play the harp. Verse 23, and so it was whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, the negative spirit, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him. We have David now in Saul's household, if you will. Chapter 17, the story of David and Goliath. That's a familiar story to all of us, that he kills the giant. He's actually put in command of some of Saul's army, and he has a lot of success through this. Chapter 18. Now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Here we see the beginnings of that friendship. And we see in verse 5, so David went out whenever Saul sent him, and he behaved wisely, and Saul set him over the men of war. We're going to see him have a lot of success. But then we see in verse 7 a comment that we're going to see several times. The women sang as they danced, and they said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000. This is really the point at which Saul becomes very much the enemy of David. He resents David. He resents the success he's having. He resents David's standing with the people. Saul was very angry. Verse 8. Verse 11. Saul tried to kill him with a spear, but David escaped twice. Verse 12 is a very telling statement. Now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. We go then through the marriage of David to Michal, Saul's daughter. We'll skip down to 19, is an example of how Jonathan helps David. Now Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted greatly. So he told David, my father seeks to kill you. So we go through a number of times that Saul is trying to kill David. David is always managing to escape, sometimes through foreknowledge by being warned by Jonathan or Michal. There's a very interesting event that occurs in chapter 21. If you'd turn over there. David is fleeing from Saul. Now David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one is with you?" Apparently David is traveling alone at this place. So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you or what I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found.'" David's hungry. He wants something to eat. Priest said, "There is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women." And David assures them that they have done that. And in verse 6, "So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, which had been taken from before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away." This is what I think most people believe is where the tabernacle is residing after Shiloh has been destroyed. Shiloh no longer becomes the meeting place, the central place of worship. Apparently, this place here, Nob, has become the place, because we do see an example of having apparently the table of showbread is there, because it has been put in place, and it is replaced on a periodic basis because it had been replaced just before David arrived. We're also going to see later on that this was a central place for priests, because when Saul is told about what happens here, he comes in, contacts Abimelech, tells him that he's unhappy that Abimelech has helped David, and he kills Abimelech. And not only that, but I think there are 85 or 86 other priests that Saul kills. So I guess it's circumstantial evidence, but this is the only place that we see any evidence of the tabernacle or its furnishings other than the ark being placed. Okay. I knew that would stir something from Ralph.
It's not here.
Okay, start over. You're on now.
I said at this time, the ark is not here.
The ark is not here.
It is, I forget the name of the town right off now, but the other fellow's taking care of it since the Philistines sent it back by cart. So the ark is not in residence here, so I don't know how. It was apparently a gathering place, as you've mentioned, but it wasn't complete. And yet here's Saul in his anger hunting for David, and if he would ever have sought the Lord in any kind of manner, yet he continually wars against God. He kills the priest. This is not the extent of the things. Yet to come is when he will go to Endor to deal with the witch.
Yes, that's
He's already disobeyed God. Later he will actually deal with something that was so illegal that the lady was scared to death that she was being done by an undercover operation, I guess, a sting, you might say. But it turned out that it was Saul. And I bet she was so surprised when Samuel's spirit rose up. But the point here is the fact that everything is in such a turmoil in this country. Saul is chasing around David instead of attending to the business he should have been. It's one thing to be following God. It's another thing to be in direct opposition to God. And that's where Saul was rapidly placing himself at. He was against God. He was doing all these things against David because he perceived David was the next king. He was sure of it. And yet he fought with himself over it. There would be times he would love David, and there would be times he would hate David. Yet I think what we see is the mind of a man who is beside himself and doesn't really know what to do. He has found himself against God, opposing God. And yet I think in reality that's not really wanted to be, but he just, we get ourselves, and the lesson about this for us is that we get ourselves in a condition where we can't let go. We can't hold on, and we can't let go. We can't make up our minds to do what God has asked us to do. And when we find ourselves in that condition, we really ought to stop and repent and take a different change in our lives. Some people are able to do that, and some never can. And that's where Saul finds himself at.
Yeah. It's, we think in some ways that things can't get any worse. That here you have Saul chasing after David. God is with David against Saul. But we're going to see, and this is getting ahead, but just a little forewarning of what's going to come, is that when Saul dies, there is actually a major civil war between the followers of Saul and the followers of David. And that is probably the low point in the history of the people. From there, it's all, once David consolidates all of the tribes together, it's all upward. It's the glory years of the Israelite people. But they have to go through some miserable times before they get there. And, I was talking about the tabernacle, and the ark is not there, as Ralph says. We've already seen that the Philistines have had it, and then it's gone to another place where it's going to stay for a long time. Okay, let's do after this event of the Holy Bread, David goes to Gath, and Gath is one of the major cities of the Philistines. And we'll see as we go through David's fleeing from Saul that he spends a lot of time in Philistine country and actually forging relationships with Philistines. But here, he leaves the Philistine area by pretending to be insane, which is one of the interesting parts of his career. He changed his behavior before them, pretending madness. He scratched on the doors of the gate and let his saliva fall down on his beard. So he leaves, and in chapter 22, he goes to the cave of Adullam. And at this cave, his family hears about it. They come and join him. And he gains really a small army. 400 men join him at this cave. We see two caves that David takes refuge in. This is one of them. The second one is in chapter 24. In this cave, David and some of his men are in the deep recesses of the cave. Saul actually comes in to spend the night. David's men want to kill Saul, but David won't have any of it. He spares his life. He does cut off a part of his blanket so he can prove to Saul that he had the opportunity to do so. So we see two times that David takes refuge in a cave. We have two psalms that are written from a cave. Psalm 57 and Psalm 142. 57 is fairly lengthy, but I think it'd be interesting to look at Psalm 142. I cry out to the Lord with my voice. With my voice to the Lord, I make my supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare before him my trouble. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path and the way in which I walk. They have secretly set a snare for me. Look on my right hand and see, for there is no one who acknowledges me. Refuge has failed me. No one cares for my soul. I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise your name. The righteous shall surround me, for you shall deal bountifully with me. We can see in this psalm the mental state that David had during all of this. On the one hand, he's discouraged. He feels all alone. He feels persecuted. But he also feels like he has a protector, that he has someone that he can trust. If you want, let me challenge you to do something. Go home, read the other Psalm, 57, and then read the two chapters that deal with David hiding in the cave, and see if you think one description fits which cave, or see which description fits which cave. I think you'll see a difference there. In the first cave, David has his family arrive. He has 400 men come join him. Second cave, he doesn't have any of that. He simply has his persecutor in the front of the cave. He has an opportunity to kill him, end it right there, but he doesn't do it. Do that and tell me what you think. Okay. See where we want to. Chapter 25. Samuel dies. The Israelites gathered together and lamented for him and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. You know, Samuel is one of those characters that he's unique in the sense that he served as priest, prophet, and judge. I don't think there are any of the other judges that fill those other two jobs. He's unique in that. He's also one of those that the only negative that we read about him in the Bible is his failure to control his sons. just one of those good, solid representatives of God in the Old Testament. Many of them we see their feet of clay, like David, Saul, but Samuel is one of those that we don't see that. In the remainder of this chapter, we see David taking really two wives. There is a man by the name of Nabal, Nabal, has a wife of Abigail. And he is a rich man with lots of sheep. And apparently, in some of the times that David has been roving the countryside, he has come upon the sheep shearers of Nabal and has been good to them. So he sends his men now to see Nabal and ask for some provisions. And Nabal pretends didn't know anything about it. You know, get out of my way. I know you're not. Abigail hears all of this, and she makes provisions for David and sends him, in verse 18, 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Ultimately, after all of this, Nabal dies. God strikes him down. David takes Abigail as his wife. And in verse 43, David also took a woman by the name of Ahinoam of Jezreel. So at this point in his fleeing from Saul, he has acquired 2 wives in addition to the daughter of Saul. Chapter 26, he spares Saul again. Chapter 27 is where we see David allying himself with the Philistines. He makes the acquaintance of the king Ashik, verse 6, and he gave him the community of Ziklag, Ziklag. David pretends to attack the Israelites. Verse 9, whenever David attacked that's going to be is that the second bell? I better take that up next time because that's going to be not a good way to leave it. We'll start there next week.